Hi everyone, I'm Gertie and I'm so excited that today we're going to be doing a video tutorial for our new charm pattern, which is in our foundations line. And this is a classic vintage style slip pattern, which you all have been asking me for a while. So as you may know, on our Patreon, we're doing a year of Hollywood icons. That's our theme for the year. So of course, I couldn't help but think of Elizabeth Taylor in her classic white slip in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Butterfield 8. When I think of classic Hollywood, I definitely think of the classic white slip. So I've created a slip pattern for you that can be made in a lot of different ways depending on your fabric choice. It has a really lovely three-piece cup, adjustable straps, and then the body of the slip is cut on the bias in a way that really skims your figure in a lovely way. One thing I love about this slip pattern too is that it is super versatile. We have 4 lengths included, so you can make it as a camisole, you could make it as a baby doll length nightie or chemise, your below knee length classic vintage slip length, or you can make it as a full length dramatic gown. So I think this has a lot of different options as sleepwear, even as a slip dress to wear out and about, or as an underpinning. So I also want to tell you that there are 2 patterns included in this installment in our foundation series. There's the slip as well as a really lovely vintage inspired tap pant. So I will be doing a separate video on the tap pants because they are so adorable and really add a lot of vintage flair to your foundations wardrobe. All right, so let's get started talking about the pattern pieces and then we'll get into fabrics and supplies. Now we're going to look at our pattern pieces. So what I always like to do for our videos here and on our Patreon videos is that we minimize the pieces down to quarter scale so that we can look at them all together on the tabletop and get a sense of how they're going to come together. I just feel like it helps you really understand the pattern before you start sewing. Okay, so this is your skirt front piece. You can see it's the full piece. Usually we just see half of a sewing pattern piece, right? This is the full piece because it is cut on the bias and you're going to cut 1. You have your different length cutting lines marked here. And this is your skirt back. You're going to cut 2 of this. And that is because there's a center back seam. We were really struggling with getting the fit on the slip right in the back because there was some pooling in the back of the lower back. And then Andrea and I went to a burlesque show and we saw a dancer taking off her nightie and we saw a center back seam and we're like, oh my God, that's the solution. So we figured it out. There's a center back seam thanks to that burlesque dancer and also a fisheye dart to help you get a really nice fit in the back. Even well, this is a garment that you pull over your head, right? So there's no closures. Make sure that you snip into all of your notches. These notches are important for matching to the cup, all right? So keep that in mind. And then let's talk about your upper pieces. This is your bodice upper back. You're gonna cut 2 on the fold. The upper bodice is all self-lined, okay? So keep that in mind. This is your 3-piece cup. You have your upper cup and then the 2 lower cup pieces. It's really important to pay attention to your notches here and also mark your circles. It's very easy to turn these pieces upside down accidentally. So just make sure you keep them oriented and give yourself those markings to help yourself understand the direction they're supposed to be in. For all of the cut pieces, you're going to cut 4 of each, okay? Because it is self-lined. And then only 2 pattern pieces left here. These are both strap pieces. This is the front strap cut on the bias. And then this tiny little piece, which I'm just gonna warn you, looks a lot like your test square when you're printing out your PDF pattern. It's very easy to throw it away because it's pretty much exactly the same size as a test square. But you do need it. It is your back strap. It's sort of like a little tab where you attach your ring, okay, your lingerie hardware. All right, so those are all your pattern pieces. It's pretty simple. What I really like about this slip is that it's going to get us into some more advanced sewing techniques like cutting on the bias and then adding fun trims like chantilly lace trim and that sort of thing. So next we're going to talk about all those supplies, trims, and the other notions that you need for the slip. Now we're going to talk about fabric and supplies. So this is a kind of project that you can make as easy or as challenging as you like. And one way to make it a little bit easier if you're not used to sewing with slippery fabrics, if you've never sewn on the bias before, would be to use a less slippery fabric. So I'm going to talk about those first. And as always, you can consult your pattern instructions for our full list of recommended fabrics. But I will tell you that you are looking for woven fabrics, not a knit, and you're looking for lightweight fabrics with some drape to them. Okay, so in the easier to sew category would be a rayon challis. I love rayon challis because it has a really beautiful drape. It's also very budget friendly. I order quite a bit from Fabric Wholesale Direct, and they have a very economical rayon challis. And as you can see, it drapes really beautifully. Now, if you're a person who loves cotton underpinnings, which is great for summer, something like a lawn, a Liberty of lawn would be beautiful, of course, but any cotton lawn or batiste of voile would be really pretty. So any lightweight woven cottons like this. They don't have quite the same drape as a challis or a silk will, but it's still going to look really beautiful when it's cut on the bias. Now let's talk about silks, because this is my favorite for this slip. Making your own silk lingerie is just really luxurious, and you're going to be able to do it a lot more economically than if you bought silk lingerie. So you can justify it that way if you need to justify buying silk. So some of my favorite silk fabrics for this pattern would be a silk crepe de chine, which, as you can see, drapes really beautifully. It has a more matte effect. So if you don't like shiny silks, then crepe de chine may be for you. Also, georgette is a really nice one. Chiffon, but of course, remember that those can be quite sheer. All right, so you may need to underline, or you may want them to be sheer. That's another effect you can get with this pattern. So that's your crepe de chine. Also, charmeuse would be really lovely. So charmeuse is matte on one side and shiny on the other. And you can use either side you want as your outer side of the fabric. We also use some heavier silks for some of the samples, like 4-ply crepe, crepe back satin. Those are all really nice silks to use. And all of these fabrics, by the way, charmeuse, crepe de chine, are available in synthetics as well. So if you're not a silk person, or if polyester is polyester, it's like a drag name. If polyester is more in your budget, then you can definitely do a synthetic silk. Okay, so next let's talk about synthetics. These are both synthetic fabrics. You could look for polyester, acetate, fabrics like that. This is a synthetic satin, which, just like a silk satin, you can see is shinier on one side, more like crepe on the other side. And then this one is an acetate lining fabric. So if you want something that's really going to function like a lining for a dress, this might be a good choice. All right, let's talk about trims next, because this is a really fun place to get into different lace trim options. So you can choose any width lace trim that you want. This is a narrower one with cording. So the way, I'm going to show you how to apply these, but you can apply them at the bottom, and then we're going to zigzag them on and then trim away the fabric behind it. So it doesn't matter if it's 2 inches or 8 inches tall, it's the same technique. So this one's really pretty. I also really love this little pink one. We're going to give you sources for all of these laces. I like to order a lot of these on Etsy. And then this is really nice. This really gives you the look of a fine French lingerie where they cut out around the chantilly lace and then applique it on, but the work is kind of already done for you in this specific chantilly trim. So that one's really beautiful. But yeah, go, go into your local store, or even just go on Etsy and see what's available to you, because there's so many beautiful lace trims out there. Of course, you're going to need all-purpose polyester thread to match your fabric, and make sure it's not too thick, and definitely you're wanting to be using polyester. And then you're going to need a needle to match your fabric weight. 70-10 is going to be the perfect needle size for all of these fabrics. And I like Microtex because it's sharper and tends to puncture these fine silks a little bit better than a universal or a ballpoint needle. And then finally, you need 2 sets of rings and sliders, and these are 3/8 of an inch wide. You can get them in black or other colors. I really love all the sort of metallic tones that are on the market now. So gold, silver, even a rose gold would be really pretty and kind of elevate your slip to the next level. All right, so those are fabrics, trims, and supplies. And next we're gonna get sewing. Oh, I wanted to talk about, I'm just gonna go back. I wanted to talk about cutting these slippery fabrics. So that can be a challenging part of creating a bias cut garment like this. One thing that really works well is if you layer tissue paper on your surface and then put your silk fabric down, so it doesn't slide around as much. It makes a huge difference in cutting out this type of fabric accurately, okay? Because I know they can move around a lot. So yeah, use tissue paper. Even just gift wrapping tissue paper is fine. We have a huge roll of specialty fashion cutting tissue paper in the studio, but just any tissue paper you can find is going to give you something grippy for your fabric to stick to as you cut. All right, so next we're going to get started sewing. Okay, so ready to sew. You can see I'm using this lovely silk. This is a crepe back satin, so you can see one side is matte and the other side has this beautiful sheen to it. I love this coral pink color, so pretty. So we're gonna be talking about stay stitching first. For this design, you need to do a lot more stay stitching than you're probably accustomed to, just because these slippery fabrics and these bias cut sections can stretch out of shape a lot more than you're used to, and it's really good to stabilize everything before you get started sewing. So this is the upper cup. You are going to stay stitch the upper edge and the lower edge. And with stay stitching, it's always important to be, your stitching direction is very important. So you want to stitch from the side seam to center front, side seam to center front, and always stitching towards the center front or the center back respectively on each piece. So it's kind of like your darts, how we press them towards center front or center back. Stay stitching is the same. To avoid warping the pieces, you always want to be going towards the center front or the center back. So that's your upper cup. With your lower cup pieces, you just need to do the upper edges. So again, you're going to go, this is the center seam on the cup, the lower cup, from that seam to center front, side seam to the center seam. And as you can see, I'm sewing the camisole, so I don't have long pieces that you can't see off the table. On the camisole front, you're going to be going from the side seams towards the center front and overlapping, so you have to do it in 2 stages. Your camisole back, you are going to be stitching from the side seams to center back at the upper edge only. And then finally, on your bodice back, your camisole / slip back, you're going to be stitching from the side seams to center back, overlapping at center back. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do sewing wise on camera is we're going to be sewing your fisheye darts, which are on the bodice back pieces, the lower back. So you can see I've marked it in. I really wanted you all to be able to see it, so I used this disappearing ink marker. And a fisheye dart is pretty much a double-ended dart, and you're going to fold it, whoops, where are my pins? Fold it right sides together, and we're going to pin each end, and you're going to start stitching. You're going to treat it as 2 darts essentially. Start stitching at the center to one end, and then you're going to flip it over, stitch from the center to the other end. Okay, so I'm going to pin one side at a time. You can see I pinned the end and the center, and then I'm pinning the dart legs, making sure that they align from top to bottom. And if they don't, you can just adjust slightly, just roll it between your fingers, and that looks good. Okay, so I'm starting at the center of the start using a regular stitch length, so like 2.5 and a straight stitch. I'm going to back stitch. I just oiled my machine and it is running so much more smoothly. If you haven't oiled your machine in a while and yours requires oiling, here's your reminder. It really does help, and it's so much quieter. It feels so good. All right, so now I'm stitching to the point, and I'm just stitching off the fabric, not too far, leaving a couple inches so that I can hand tie. So I'll hand tie this side. Just do this as we go. And now we're going to sew the other side of the dart. So same thing, flip it over. I'm going to be sewing from the center of the dart to the point. And doing it in 2 stages like this gets you a nice smooth point. So you're not going to have any bubbles or puckers at the point. All right, so you can overlap your stitching slightly here. You don't want a gap in your stitching. And back stitch. Again, I'm going to hand tie those ends. And there's my stitch dart. You can probably guess we're going to press it now. So I'm going to grab my ham, and we're going to be pressing towards center back, which is the side without the dart. I'm not the dart. What am I saying? The notch. The notch. This is a notch, not a dart. So I'm trying to keep my iron on a low setting. I always say to do that, and then I really have a problem actually doing it because I want to steam it and go crazy. But I'm really trying to practice what I preach here. Lightly press it from the right side. You could use a press cloth here if you're nervous about your fabric. And there we go. There is your first fisheye dart. Of course, you're going to do that on the other side. And in the next chapter, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about sewing the center back seam with a French seam. Okay, so what we're going to be doing in this chapter is sewing the center back seam. And this seam is really important to get shaping and not have it bag out at your lower back. So I'm going to do a French seam on this. French seams are so nice for lingerie, and they're completely enclosed seam. So here's my favorite method for doing French seams. Okay, so normally we would put these right sides together, right? Shiny sides together. Well, with French seams, you do wrong sides together. And it feels really weird. And make sure that you're working on the side without a notch, okay? The side with the notch is the side seam. Okay, so I'm just matching my raw edges here. I am wrong sides together. And now I'm going to stitch this seam at 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so this is my 3/8 of an inch mark. Right here, I'm using my regular stitch length, 2.5 millimeters. And now what we're gonna do is we're going to trim the seam allowance down, and I like to do this at an angle, like holding my scissors at an angle like this, so turning them towards me. To trim down about half of the seam allowance here. And when I hold my seam allowance or my scissors at an angle, it kind of naturally grades the seam allowance so that they're one is slightly wider than the other. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a raised surface that I can work on. And I think pressing is like super important to French seams. So I do 2 rounds of pressing. First, I press it open, actually 3 rounds of pressing, okay? So first, we press the seam allowance open. And then I press both seam allowances to one side, like that. And then we fold it in half, right sides together, and press flat. And you want to press with the seam line should be right on the edge here. I have to put this on a higher heat setting. I can't take this low setting. I told you I couldn't do it. It's not pressing. Silk setting, terrible. Okay, but you see what I did there. I pressed it flat. Now we're going to pin it like so. Oh my God. Do you see that? This happened the other day with this. You can just kind of pop it back on. You know what? I'll do that while you're not watching. So now I'm going to stitch at 1/4 inch, which will, if I cut my seam allowance down to the correct width, less than 1/4 inch, then that will enclose those raw edges. Okay, so there is my 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to press it open, make sure you don't have any little threads or raw edges showing here. And now we can press the seam allowances to one side. And I would also recommend pressing from the right side if you're not worried about damaging your fabric. But of course you can always use a press cloth. Okay, so that's our very first French seam. See how nicely finished that is, no raw edges. And now we can move on to the next step. Okay, so here's our center back seam. You can see I got a little overzealous with my pressing, so it did leave like a bit of a ridge from the seam, but you can go back and press the fabric itself, and let me be a cautionary tale to you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our camisole / slip front, the lower front, which looks like this, and we're going to put it wrong sides together. Okay, we're doing another French seam, as you may have guessed. So now we're doing the side seams, front camisole to back. So I'm going to do the exact same thing that we did for the center back seam. I'm going to make sure that my wrong sides are together. And the way I'm tracking that, because I'm using this crepe back satin, is I want to make sure that the crepey side, the matte side, is facing itself. Okay, and the shiny side is out. So if you have a fabric that is not, it's not so obvious what the right and wrong sides are, definitely a good idea to mark them with a chalk. Sometimes I'll just put like an X in chalk in like the upper corner, just so I remember, so I don't confuse pieces. And I'm matching my notch at the side seam. And you've already seen me do one of these, so I'm going to go ahead and do this off camera. If you need a review, you can go back to the last chapter with our handy chapter, what do you call them, timestamps. With our handy chapter timestamps, you can go back to the previous chapter and watch a French seam again. But I'm going to sew at 3/8. I'm going to trim down with my scissors at an angle. I'm going to do my 3-step pressing process. Open to one side, fold in half, and then press flat, okay? So, and then I guess it's a 4-step pressing process, because then I'm gonna fold the finished seam allowance to one side. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going forward with this, and then we'll come back for the next step. Okay, so you can see that I have sewn my side seams. I did want to mention that anytime you're pressing seams to one direction with French seams, it's a good idea to always be consistent. I always press mine towards the back, okay? So everything kind of, all seams would radiate around towards center back. And then at center back, you kind of just have to like choose a side. Okay, so there is my lower camisole. I also wanted to mention that if you're sewing the slip, you're gonna need to, for the long, like floor length slip, you need to leave a slit on the sides, at least one side. So follow the instructions for that. And then for the below knee length slip, same with that. You may wish to leave slits on that as well. Okay, so with anything bias, I would not recommend hanging this because it's going to stretch out, and it's unlikely, I would guess, that you're gonna be storing it hung rather. So my suggestion would be that you just kind of fold it and put it to the side and keep things flat as you're working with them. Okay, so next we are moving on towards the straps. So here you can see I have one completed strap set. So the pattern has the one long front strap and then the short, tiny little back strap. So you can see I've already sewn the back strap. I'm going to take you through the front strap now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is fold my strap in half, right sides together. So for me, that will be with the shiny side together. And we're going to be stitching along, we're going to stitch along one long edge. And I'm just going to lightly press mine. My fabric is like so, the only word I can think of is bouncy, like it keeps bouncing back when you try to fold it. So I'm not like, I'm just kind of hovering over, just using a little bit of heat here, not completely flattening it, but I want it to stay in place as I'm stitching. So I'm doing that. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be stitching this from using the fold as my seam allowance side, rather than normally we would do this using the raw edge as our guide, right? I find with little pieces like this, especially when they're cut on the bias, it's so easy for your piece to get skinnier in the middle, and then if you're using the raw edge, you get really inconsistent widths here. And for a spaghetti strap or a thin strap like this to look really nice, you need it to be a consistent width, okay? So I'm gonna be stitching using the fold on the right, to the right of my needle, and I'm gonna be stitching using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so 3/8 of an inch would be right here. I'm using my fold. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to trim down these seam allowances to a scant 1/4 inch. And again, you can hold your scissors at an angle if you like to kind of grade those seam allowances slightly. Got so focused on my slight grading. So excited about that tip. But I got a little wide here, so I'm going to go back. I mean, above all, your seam allowance can't be wider than the finished strap, right? That makes sense. Okay, I'm going to trim down a little here. Okay, and now we are going to do the dreaded turning right side out of this tube. I just did a reel on Instagram where I showed how to use a fast turn tool. I don't have those with me at the annex, so I'm going to be showing you another method today, which is using the loop turner. I hate these. So you're going to feed this through. See how it has a little latch here that closes? That's important. So we're going to feed this through. And now you're going to take the little latch that opens and closes, and you're going to use it to pierce the fabric. Like so. And then close the latch. And now we're going to turn this right side out. So just start pulling like this. Ooh, it's all happening. Oh my God, that was the best I've ever done that. Thank God it caught it on video. It's really satisfying with this shiny, smooth fabric. It just glides through. Okay, so now we're going to press this flat. I like to press mine so that the seam line is rolled slightly to one side. So you could do that. You just have to be careful about which way you put the strap on in the next step. Or you can put that, so to make things easier in the next step, you can just put the seam line on the edge so that the strap looks the same from front to back. Here. And try not to like tug too much or push too much with the iron, because you don't want to stretch out the bias necessarily. Okay, so this will be the right side of the strap. Okay, and if you like, if you can turn in one short end of the strap and edge stitch here. That is easier with some fabrics than others. I find it really difficult, some might say impossible, with this thicker satin. So I'm going to leave this raw and then just trim close to it. So you can do it either way. Okay, so you can see that I've also done the same process with my back strap, which is these short little pieces. And now we're gonna grab our rings and sliders. I found these really cute gold ones on Wawak, which is where we've been doing a lot of our notions ordering lately. So now you're going to take your front strap, the long one, and you are going to feed one end through the slider, through the center bar, so that this is wrapped around the center bar. And you just want it to extend a 1/4 inch past your center bar, about like that, okay? And you can see I have the raw end is now on top of the wrong side of my strap, which I only know it's the wrong side because I did that treatment with the seam allowance being on the wrong side, but you may not have done that. So next thing we're gonna do is go to the machine because we're going to try, and we're gonna succeed to stitch right here as close as possible to the slider. So I'm moving my needle so that I can stitch right here. It's very fiddly. Lowering my presser foot. And you're gonna stitch like this. I can hear, my machine hates doing this machine, so I can hear the thread getting a little jammed. So I may need to stop and fix this, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm stitching right here, and then I'm gonna trim this shorter. Just trim that raw edge away, okay? So we'll come back for the next chapter and you'll see what this is supposed to look like after I fix my machine. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to the cups. So as you can see, I've already pre-done some work here. I've sewn one outer cup. The left outer cup still needs to be assembled, and that's what we're gonna do on camera. And then we'll talk about this in a minute, but I've already assembled the lining, the bodice lining. So that's the two front cups sewn to the upper back at the side seams. So the way we're gonna do this is we're gonna start with the lower cup. So it's a really good idea. If you get confused, it's so easy to turn these pieces around, right? They look very similar. On this center cup seam, the lower cup seam, you'll see notches, corresponding notches right here, okay? So, and then remember that you did your stay stitching on the upper edge. So you should be seeing stay stitching at the top, notches right here. All right, so we're gonna put this right sides together. Now, no point in doing French seams on these pieces. Well, first of all, it would be a nightmare. And second of all, this bra portion is going to be completely enclosed. So we're not going to finish our seams at all. So right sides together as usual. And now we're gonna stitch this at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, now lingerie seams generally get trimmed down pretty far. So we're gonna trim these down to 1/4 inch. And now I'm gonna grab my ham and we're gonna press this open. At the studio, I have this really cool form. I can't remember what it's called, like a bra form or a bust form. I always call it the boob form. But it's really just looks like a round bosom. And it's much easier to press bra and cup seam allowances on. I ordered it on Etsy. It's like handmade from Vietnam or something, but it's really lovely. I would love to get one for the annex, adding that to my mental list. Okay, so there is my lower seam, my lower cup seam. And now you can probably guess we are going to sew this seam here. So the lower cup unit to the upper cup. And there's a notch right here and here. So this notch corresponds to the one on the seam allowance on the lower cup. This one corresponds to the seam we just sewed. So right sides together again. And now, so these are curved seams, right? And it can be a little tricky to match them. You want to match, and I know I've said this a million times before, but you're gonna have a little corner overhanging here, and that's because you want to match at the 5/8 of an inch seam line, okay? Not at the edge. Okay, so I'm matching there. Now I'm matching my notch. And you may find, see how there's a little difference between the two because of the curves? So you can, if you need to, go in and clip into the one that you need to ease. In my case, that's the upper cup. And see how now we can spread the clips and get it to match. And this is going to be different for every cup size. These curves look different or are more pronounced in the bigger cup sizes. So keep that in mind. Mine may not look like yours, and that's why. Okay, so now I'm going to the side seam. And now I'm going to match up these edges. And it's easier to match on this side, so no clipping required for me here. And now I'm going to stitch at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so now we can trim these seam allowances to 1/4 inch. And now I'm going to press these seam allowances open. Again, it's really good to have a curved form here. A lot of times on lingerie, you will see that the seams are trimmed and then top stitched. Like these would be, or you could top stitch and then trim away the excess, okay? So I'm just telling you that because if you are someone who really likes your seam allowances to lay incredibly flat, then you might consider adding top stitching on either side of these seam allowances to hold the seam allowances flat. Okay, so there's my center cup seam sewn. I'm going to press just a little bit more from the right side. And then next we'll move on to sewing these two cups together. Okay, so now we can sew this center seam. So we're going to put the cups right sides together. And it's very important that we match the center front seam. So I am the horizontal cup seam at center front. So I'm going to put a pin through that center horizontal seam. I'm going to match it on the opposite side, the opposite cup. And we're just sewing this little portion right here. And now I'm going to trim these seam allowances down just like we have been to 1/4 inch. I hate those scissors. I don't even know why I keep them around anymore. All right. 1/4 inch. And now we're going to press this open. Okay, so there is my bra front. Now we're going to sew the side seams of the bra unit. So again, no French seams required. We're gonna take this piece, the upper back, and put it right sides together with the bra, the front. And you've got a notch here to match to your horizontal cup seam. This side. And now we're going to stitch these side seams. Next, we're going to trim these seam allowances down to 1/4 inch. And we're going to press both open. Okay, so here is our outer bodice or bra unit, looking lovely. And you're gonna do all those same steps on the lining, which I've already done. And then we are going to, this is already done for you for the purposes of this video, stay stitch at 5/8 of an inch all the way around the lower edge. And what we're gonna do next is with that stay stitching, you're gonna turn the seam allowances to the wrong side. And so you want to use that stay stitching to help you turn it. It's like your guide, right? It's your measurement guide, but also it helps you, it's like a hard edge for your fingers to find and roll to the inside of the garment. Now we're going to need to do some clipping here, I see. So around center front, we're just going to need to, what I would do is I would just kind of take a notch out here. About like that. Hopefully yours will be a little neater than mine. And that will help you press that nicely like so. And the reason for this is we want to prepare this to hand stitch on the inside of the garment to get a nice clean finish. Okay. So in the next step, we'll be ready to grab our straps and attach them and then line the bra so that it's fully enclosed. Okay, so now we're ready to attach the straps or baste the straps to the bra part of the bodice. So make sure you're working with the one that does not have this turned in seam allowance at the bottom. That's gonna be your lining. And so you're going to, being very careful not to twist your straps, you're going to right sides together. The front will be placed in between the two circles. And again, very careful not to twist. The back, right sides together with the back between the circles. And aligning the raw edge of the strap with the raw edge of the bodice. Okay, so you can just kind of take a look real quick, make sure the straps are going to be on straight, not twisted. And now we're going to baste these ends on. So you can use a long basting stitch. With something this tiny, I generally just use a small stitch. Okay, so you're just going to continue around like that, basting all 4 of the strap ends on. Okay, so now we are ready to sew the lining to the bodice neckline. So what you're going to do is you're going to get the straps out of the way now. So just kind of let them fall to the sides there. And now we're going to be putting the 2 right sides together. So you want to match those strap points, your center front. So, as I'm sure I've mentioned before, I like to, when I'm doing something like this, I will always do my match points first. Don't just start blindly pinning, right? You want to start with a match point, go to the next match point, and then fill in pins in between, okay? And that's how you know you're sort of evenly distributing things the way that they're meant to be. Just make sure that the straps are facing down, out of the way. And now we're going to stitch all the way around the neckline at 5/8 of an inch. And just a note that you have some pivot points here. Center front, you're going to pivot right on that seam line. And then when you get to these circles, you're going to pivot at each of those. I like to be sure to pivot rather than using the circle. I'm using the edge of the strap as my guide. They should be roughly the same, obviously, but just helps guide and have everything look super polished. Okay, so you can just kind of double check that your strap points look good before trimming anything down. There we go. And now the next thing we're going to do is grade our seam allowances. And the lining, sorry, I'm so confused. The lining will be the narrower seam allowance. So grading always means that you are trimming one seam allowance narrower than the other. And make sure that you're working on the lining first and you're trimming this seam allowance down to a little less than 1/4 inch. Trim down the strap ends as well. And then you're going to do the outer bodice seam allowance. It can be just slightly taller. So I'm sorry, did I say 1/4 inch? It should be 1/8 of an inch and then 1/4 inch, okay? So your finished seam allowance, the widest one should be 1/4 inch. Okay, so I'm gonna go around and do the grading and then we'll come back for understitching. Okay, so you can see I've graded all the way around. I did do a little notch at my center point, at center front. There's an inner curve under the arm here, so I clipped in. And then one thing that I have been doing lately, I never used to worry about this, but now I do apparently. I go back and reinforce any stitches where they intersect with seams, because after you grade, then you get rid of your back stitching, right? So I do worry about that sometimes, especially on things that get a lot of wear, like slips. Okay, so now we are going to understitch. So we're going to open out the lining from the bodice, and we're gonna understitch the lining. So on mine, that's this one. It's the one with the turned under seam allowance, which it should be on yours too. So you're gonna have that on the right-hand side. And now we're gonna take it to the machine. And now we're gonna be stitching just to the right of the seam line. And one little trick you can use here, I'm gonna actually take this out and show you, is using an edge stitch foot. So a blind hem foot also works for this. So any foot that has this like blade down the center, you're going to align the blade with your seam line. And I'm making sure, what I just did was I made sure my seam allowances are sort of finger pressed towards the lining. So both seam allowances are underneath the lining side. I'm aligning the blade with the center of the seam, kind of holding this taut. And now I am moving my needle to the right, like so. And I'm gonna be holding the seam open like this, nice and taut. And as you stitch, you wanna make sure that your seam allowances stay oriented underneath the lining. And now you're gonna have to stop probably, yeah, on either side of the straps, okay? Because you can't quite get into that space. So you can break your stitching and then start on the other side of the strap point. So that should just be true for the front straps. On the back, that seam is like flat, so you don't have to worry about that tiny little space. So now I'm gonna pick up again. And again, very important as you understitch, make sure that both seam allowances are underneath your stitching, so underneath the lining side. Okay, so I'm going to continue this all the way around. You do have to pivot with your understitching at center front. And then we'll come back and talk next steps. Okay, so you can see this lovely bra portion of my slip. And after understitching, it's really important to take your time pressing. So press from the inside and kind of roll the understitching out to the edge. And that helps the seam line is kind of folded to the inside of the garment, rolled to the inside of the garment, and then you get a nice, clean looking professional edge on the right side. So now we are going to sew these two pieces together. This is my lower camisole. This is my bra/bodice. So in these next steps, you're going to be keeping the lining of the bra free, all right? And I'm going to kind of isolate that. And then I'm going to put the bodice right sides together with the lower camisole. And I'm matching that center front notch to the center front seam on the bra, the lower bra cups. And then again, like we talked about, you are focusing on your match points. Matching your notches. So here's the thing. Your bra is cut on the straight grain and the lower camisole/slip is cut on the bias. So that means that you may if the bias stretched out at all, you're just going to need to kind of pin ease the two together. So I use a lot of pins here. The other thing is that you're going to want to stitch with the bias side on the bottom. Anytime you have a more difficult layer, so if it's a more difficult fabric or it's bias or whatever it is, a more slippery fabric, you always want to stitch with the more difficult side on the bottom. So directly against the feed dogs, and the feed dogs will help feed it through. Because what the presser foot does on the top is that it kind of smushes the fabric, it can stretch it even further out of shape, things, you know, will not match, even worse than they already did. So keep your bias layer on the bottom, so you can see I'm pinning from the bra side because I'm going to be stitching with this side up. Okay, and now that we're all pinned, we're going to start stitching. So you can start at one side seam. Oops, I still got my edge stitch foot on, so I'll put my regular foot back on. Center my needle again, and I'm stitching at 5/8 of an inch. And now I'm stitching towards center front. My layers just got a little weird there, so I just stopped with my needle down, lifted my presser foot, and fixed them. Now I'm going to stop at my center front seam and pivot slightly. And then I'm going to continue stitching all the way around. So I'm just making sure I don't have any weird little tucks or anything in my stitching. And now we're going to grade these seam allowances. The bodice seam allowance will be the wider one, and the lower camisole / slip one will be the narrower one. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way around, trimming the camisole seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch, and then the bodice seam allowance to 1/4 inch, like so. And then those seam allowances are going to get pressed up towards the cups. And then, as you may have guessed, you will be finishing this by hand. So you're going to pin this so that it covers the seam allowances and then slip stitch that seam. Okay, so I'm going to go work on my grading off camera and then we'll be back. Okay, so believe it or not, we're at the end of this process. So I have pinned in my lining seam allowance. I still need to slip stitch it. And now what I would do is let this hang for 24 hours, just see if you need to even out your hem at all. And then you're going to focus on hemming. So if you have slits for the slip length versions, you would hem your your slit first, following the instructions, and then you're going to hem the lower edge. So what I've done first is I've done a line of guide stitching at 1/4 inch. And this is an easy way to do a narrow hem. These fabrics can be so difficult to work with, these slippery fabrics, especially if you're trying to measure at the same time using those little seam gauge rulers. But I know you can stitch at 1/4 inch on your sewing machine in a nice straight line, right? So I do a line of stitching, I call it guide stitching, at 1/4 inch, and then I let that be my guide for turning the hem up 1/4 inch. And I'm just turning the hem so that the stitching is turned just to the wrong side of the garment. All the way around. All right, you get the idea. And then I'm going to go back and turn it up a second time. So this is a double fold hem. Okay, so I'm going to continue like that all the way around, pin it in place, and then I'm going to edge stitch along that fold, or you can do it from the right side at 1/4 inch, okay? And then that is it for your little camisole. So next we'll talk a little bit about lace placement. Okay, so let's just talk some lace techniques. I did want to show you, I did all the finishing work on this. You can see how nice this hem looks. You can see how nicely finished on the inside it is with the slip stitching at the bottom of the cups. And look how nice these little straps look. I love this little gold hardware, it looks great. Okay, so that is your finished camisole. So you also have the option to add some lace trim, which is something I love with lingerie. You can get very creative with lace trim. So I'm just going to show you one example. This is the same pattern made as a slip. So on this one, in this lovely leopard print crepe de chine, you can see I have this like lace trim, and what you can do is cut out around various motifs to make it work with the space that you're filling, right? So I cut out around these flowers, and then this is all hand applied under the bust, and same with on the cups. So doing with hand stitching after everything is finished. Okay, so that's one option. I did 2 pieces here and then 1 piece underneath the bust here. And I have a big bin of lace trim in the studio just so that anytime I'm working on a project like this, I have several different kinds of black lace and I can see which one works the best, you know, and get creative with it. You don't have to use it as it is. Cut it up, use one side of the scallops, not the other, whatever you want to do. And then on the hem, so instead of hemming it like I did on the camisole with the 1/4 inch doubled hem, I used a different lace from the bin, and you can see that this has this really cool shape to it. And so this I applied by machine. I'm going to put it on the surface here so you can see it a little bit better. And so what you need to do with this one is place it, you want to make sure like this is center front, right? So you want it to be at, you don't want to have this to offset at all. You want to make sure that you're at a center point between 2 motifs at the center of your slip. And with this one, I pinned it on, and I did not hem by machine. I just went ahead and zigzagged this on. So you can see on the back, actually I used a straight stitch on this. So whatever works best for you, it doesn't matter as long as you trim the fabric close to it. So what I did was I first stitched around the upper edge, and that can be really tricky because you have to go in these crazy shapes. And if you look at fine lingerie, you'll see this hand stitching done, or not hand stitching, but it's done by machine, but a person is operating it to get those crazy shapes. And then I did another row of stitching at the base of the lace here, and then trim behind that. So it's 2 rows of stitching. And that's all done by machine. And you just trim away very carefully, okay? And trim as close as you can to those stitches so that you don't have a lot of fraying bits there. And then you'll just have to overlap your lace at some point. And hopefully you can't see where I did it because I did such a good job. Here it is, okay. So I can definitely see, but I just kind of like turned in the edge and I tried to get the motifs to match as best I could, turn in the edge and then stitch this down. So you can see here, there's like a vertical line of stitching. So what I would say is like test some lace techniques, have fun with it. You can either, you know, applying it on the bust line by hand is the best choice, but zigzagging a hem or machine straight stitching a hem is totally a great way to do it. All right, thank you all for watching. I hope you have loved this little tutorial on your slip. Okay, everyone, I hope you have loved sewing along with me today. I cannot wait to see what you make with our new slip pattern, and I hope you've learned a lot of new skills along the way. So don't forget to check out our companion tap pants video that will also be here on YouTube. And don't forget to tag me in your makes at Gertie18 on Instagram, and you can use the hashtag #CharmPatterns. All right, I will see you next time. Goodbye.